So our second reading is from Thomas Merton's New Seeds of Contemplation. For those of you that are interested in our book club, which happens on a regular basis, once every couple of months or so, the book they're studying is this book, New Seeds of Contemplation. So be aware of that. You can, if you are interested in being part of that book club, you can tap me on the shoulder or see Justin, who runs it. So from Thomas Merton's New Seeds of Contemplation. It can easily be seen that a purely emotional worship, a life of instinct, and orgiastic religion is no spiritual life. But also, a merely rational life, a life of conscious thought and rationally directed activity, is not also a fully spiritual life. In particular, it's a characteristic modern error to reduce man's spirituality to mere mentality and to confine the whole spiritual life purely and simply within the reasoning mind. Then the spiritual life is reduced to a matter of thinking, of verbalizing, rationalizing, etc. But such a life is truncated and incomplete. The true spiritual life is neither a Dionysian orgy nor an Apollonian clarity. It transcends both. It is a life of wisdom, a life of Sophianic love. In Sophia, the highest wisdom principle, all the greatness and majesty of the unknown that is in God, and all that is rich and maternal in his creation, are united inseparably as paternal and maternal principles, the uncreated Father and the created Mother Wisdom. So I'll just repeat that last bit. It's a life of wisdom, a life of Sophianic love. In Sophia, and Sophia is the word used for wisdom in the Greek in the Old Testament. In Sophia, the highest wisdom principle, in that highest wisdom principle, all the greatness and majesty of the unknown that's in God, so all the aspects of God, and all that is rich and maternal in his creation, everything of Mother Earth, are united inseparably as paternal and maternal principles, the uncreated Father and the created Mother Wisdom. So this is the 6th week of the journey that we're taking, that we've called the journey of awakening, the journey into Lent. And if you're interested in hearing more about that, if you look in front of you on the chairs, you'll see the red little leaflets or little cards in front of you. These ones here are the ones where you can find out how to hear the other episodes, and the blue ones are for going on our mailing list. So we're preparing ourselves during this period of Lent for whatever circumstances that we find ourselves in. We prepare ourselves for moments when we're tested, when we're invited to put comfort, our comfort, before the good of the whole, when we're tempted to react from our minds rather than responding from our hearts. We're preparing ourselves for when we rush to judgment rather than hold with compassion. When we give in to our fear rather than draw from our courage from the French cœur, meaning heart, so our heartage. Up to Easter, we're following the church lectionary, which is the Bible readings that the Catholics, everyone has these readings. the set readings for everyone in Lent. And that first reading that Amy read is a classic example of a rush to judgment. It's one of the most sexual scenes in the New Testament. Mary brings out a huge bottle of the first century equivalent of Chanel No. 5. And not only does she pour it on Jesus' feet, but she wipes her feet, wipes the ointment all over Jesus' feet with her hair. I mean, just can you imagine the scene? Even in today's society, the idea of a young girl pouring perfume over a man's feet and then wiping it with her hair is pretty outrageous. But in Jesus' time, the effect would have stunned everybody there. The smell, the contorting of Mary's body as she tries to get her hair in the right place to wipe Jesus' feet. Jesus passively receiving. All of that would have driven the other men out of their minds. And that's probably why Jesus let it happen. And it was Judas who could stand it no longer. And his reaction was to judge and condemn. Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and the money given to the poor? He just couldn't contain his experience. And the only thing his mind could do was to judge Mary for her actions. Much like today, when there's outrage about something, and today there's outrage about everything, almost everything people get outraged about. When there's outrage about something, we immediately rush to judgment about that outrage. We want to shame the individual who seems to be creating the experience that we don't want to have. And rather than looking at our own reaction or responsibility in the matter, we want to blame someone for the fact that we're outraged. Jesus reprimanded him and puts the event in the context of his whole life. He makes it personal. He says, "Leave her alone. She bought it so that she might keep it for the day of my burial. You always have the poor with you, but you don't always have me." He says that it's not about what we ought to be doing from the mind's perspective, that we should give it to the poor. It's personal to Jesus and Mary's love for Jesus in particular. And, if you know the Bible, New Testament, Mary is echoing the gift of myrrh that one of the kings gave Jesus at his birth, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And myrrh is the ointment used for anointing the dead. Mary probably didn't know what she was doing. She was prompted to do it, probably without knowing why. She was coming from some sort of prompting within that urged her to do something that made no sense to the rational mind, and that's what Judas reacted to. And this was really especially poignant because it was the house of Lazarus, who Jesus had brought out of the tomb when everybody thought he was dead. So the room must have been charged with feelings around death, food, intimacy, and love. An incredibly potent mixture that drove that scenario. And our lives at the moment are just in such a potent mix. We've issues floating around us about justice and liberty, civilization, vulnerability, fear and anger, of precious values being at stake, of concepts of ownership and stewardship, of me and mine against ours and us. And the atmosphere is almost as charged as that room in Bethany. And when something happens, it sets off the charge. We're sent mad by the outrageousness of it, just as those in the room were sent mad by the scene that they witnessed. And we just have to watch for our reaction, our outrage. But we're right. I can hear you say, our outrage is justified. Outrage. Literally going beyond rage. And funnily enough, rage comes from the Latin word rabies, which means madness. It's going beyond rage. Rabies means madness. Something that sends us mad. And Judas was sent mad by the experience. In that reading from Thomas Merton, he says that true wisdom is not an instinctual emotionalism, nor is it a purely rational intellectualism. It is a life of wisdom, a life of Sophianic love, of Sophia, the highest wisdom principle, the mix of the uncreated father and the created mother wisdom, the two intellectual and emotional coming together. And in that room, we had the orgiastic, sensational clashing with the rigid intellectualism, the paternal and the maternal clashing and producing that outburst. And he just couldn't get no! You could feel he didn't want it to go any further. And if we're not careful, the clash of paternal and maternal will produce that reaction in us. Our culture wars are to some extent a clash between the paternal and the maternal, when in fact we need both to keep us sane. From the Latin word sanus, which means healthy. We need that balance, and the balance occurs when it's framed within a context. And again, context from the Latin word contextus, meaning to weave together. That's the original meaning. And the context is the circumstance that forms the setting for an event or a statement or an idea, and in terms of which it can be fully understood and assessed. And it allows things to be woven together through a greater picture of reality, the weaving together of the two. And in that room in Bethany, the context was death, the raising of Lazarus, and Jesus' impending death. Mary responded to that by anointing Jesus to consecrate him. Consecrate from the Latin word consecrare, which means to make sacred. Make sacred. Her anointing was a sacred act of dedication, and she used her hair as a way of bringing herself and her body into the equation. She was anointing Jesus with her life force and the sacred oils. And in that context, the male and the female came together in an action that both contained Jesus and predicted his death, none of which Judas understood. And we're asked to see our own experience of what's going on at the moment within the wider context, and so understand it. On the surface, we see the patriarchy trying to re-establish itself in the fear of the feminine, the fear of empathy, and everything that's labeled as woke. When we see it in those terms, all we can do is attack, to use the tools of the matriarchy to attack the encroaching patriarchy by making it wrong. And you know, if we do it like that, we'll never find a resolution. Because the patriarchy, the male energy, is an energy that includes force and violence. And if history's taught us anything, it's that force and violence will always bring the female into submission. What the patriarchy really fears is that mother wisdom. The wisdom that brought them out of the womb, that bled for them, and that will anoint them when they die. Why do you think that most patriarchal societies do not allow women to be educated? It's because they fear that feeding that matriarchal wisdom will make it so powerful that it overtakes them. And the matriarchal wisdom is just as susceptible to madness and overreach, and we can think of examples of that as well. But what Merton is saying is the two aspects of this wisdom, the uncreated father and the created mother wisdom, have to come together in a balance in order to provide a context within which they're operating and therefore reveal the truth of a situation. We've seen this battle of male and female energy going on for centuries. And that's where we see the overuse of male energy in today's society. It comes from that fear of the female energy that has become too overwhelming. Which is why wokeness has become a term of condemnation. It is shorthand for all the social gains that have been made since the 60s. And we're in a phase now of counteraction. And we have to see it as that. It's the tide going out after the tide has come in. If we're in a boat and we're subject to those tides, we will fear that we're being dragged where we don't want to go. But if we realize that we're sailing on an ocean where the tide goes in and comes out, then we can use our knowledge of the tides to navigate our way home. The future is not a choice between a patriarchy and a matriarchy. The future is both the male and the female realized, and it's in their balance that peace and harmony occur, when the male and the female are fully realized. We have to embody that, not to fight force with force, or to rush to condemn out of rationalization as to why we're right and they're wrong. That's how Judas behaved. What is required is a life of wisdom, a life of Sophianic love, the highest wisdom principle where both are united. That's what's being asked of us. And it may seem impossible. But what is impossible for man is possible with God, to quote Jesus from Luke 17. We're being asked to take a new way, a way that was impossible in the past because of the overwhelming power of the male over the female. But that is no longer the case. We're in a new land, and the rage of the male is only the rage that comes from fear, a fear of being overtaken. But the reality is that this new land is not about one overtaking the other. It is about a marriage of the two. A marriage that is non-binary, but includes both male and female without the conflict of polarity. And that is a frightening prospect for the male that is untethered from the earth and fears being powerless. Andrew Harvey, in his book Sacred Activism, says, without this difficult passage of integration, the psyche will either disintegrate into madness or maintain a precarious false stability that can easily be subverted and destroyed from within. The hundreds of millions of us now plunged into a dark night that was once individual and is now collective as well, needs all the tools necessary and available to help acquire what Jesus called the wisdom of the serpent. That wisdom that, as Blake said, is sold in the desolate market where none come to buy. Only the marriage of this dark wisdom with the inner knowledge of our sacred identity with the divine, which Jesus calls the innocence of the dove, the serpent and the dove, can engender in us both the strength and the skillful subtleness of heart and mind that the survival of our time demands. And it is in this balance that we have to hold. So, what is our role within this? Well, the male knows that the female will always be able to eventually overwhelm it. The male comes from the womb and will eventually be buried in Mother Earth. Hence, it is fearful. We have to be unafraid. Unafraid of the male, unafraid of the war, and embody the two aspects of Sophia. I'm on the last page. We have to be prophetic in what we see and explain. The context of what we're talking about here, we have to explain it to those who are reacting on both sides, because the context is all. And the context, as I've said before, is that we are not separate. There is no two parts. There is just the one. And our role in life is to help each other. It's as simple as that. Two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona, where we lay our scene, from ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. The opening lines of Romeo and Juliet, and as the play unfolds, the separation causes the death of love on both sides. We have to provide the context. We are one humanity, one species among many on this planet. All the rest is arguing about who gets what, when really the conversation should be about how we can help each other. Our role is to embody that, not to be Judas and condemn for whatever place our outrage comes from, but to see the action in the light of the whole. The ointment that Mary consecrates Jesus with is that sacred wisdom. It is the perfect smell of the male and the female coming together that so outraged everybody. Leave her alone, Jesus said. You always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. You will always have the ignorant, but you will not always have the wisdom that heals all. So it is to that wisdom that we should put our attention and that we should value. So we're going to just give an opportunity for anybody to come out with anything they want to say or make a contribution or make a criticism or I always say we give this information out with a willingness to be wrong. So would anybody like to say anything? Yes, Annie.
Like in a personal level, growth only happens when we face hard situations.
Say that again.
Growth only happens when we face hard situations.
Growth, yes.
On a personal level. And that's how we feel we are right now in a much larger scale. For a change to happen, we need to face hard situations and evolve from it.
Yes, that's so true. Sherry Mitchell, in her book, talks about the fact that sometimes when we think there is darkness, that darkness is actually prompting light to appear as well. So I think that's a lovely thing to say, Annie. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, Bob.
Amy and I struggled over that reading that she did. And I just want to say thank you for clarifying it and shedding some light on that reading. It was necessary.
Thank you, yes. It's very interesting that when you use the, yes, I'm going to come to you. When you use the lectionary, you don't get a choice. And I must say the other readings there, and when you look at a reading, you think, well, I don't really fancy that. And you can go to the Old Testament, and that was even worse. And then you go to the New Testament, something from Philippians, oh, no, I'm not talking about that. And so you just think, that's all you've got. And so you think, well, how does that relate to now? And so thank you for that. I really appreciate it. Yes?
Well, I just want to thank you for two things that really lit up for me. When you were making the comparison to when she was putting the perfume on his feet as to the myrrh that the wise men brought to baby Jesus. Feeling that parallel
Yes.
was very powerful for me. Also, when you were talking about the silence, that the silence is everything, not nothing. That was just, that's all you ever have to say. It's so powerful. I'd never listened to it that way, so that was very powerful. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you so much. And I've had a message from people who are online. They can text messages into a particular number, and Barbara Owen has texted saying one of Jesus' big and most profound lessons was to model a fully integrated, self-actualized human being, fully encompassing the divine masculine and the divine feminine. And it didn't make him weak. Rather, it made him stronger. Unfortunately, the people in power at the time were threatened by his example, and it's likely ended up leading to his demise. Thank you, Barbara Owen. So lovely, Barbara. Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate that. Yeah. So if you're watching online, you can text in, and I will get it on my phone. But yeah.
First of all, Nicholas, congratulations on doing a terrific job on that reading from the New Testament. I also think that the series is just a great contribution for aspenwisdom.org. And it made me reflect. I was sad to see this past week in the New York Times there was a column about, what is Elon Musk's IQ? And the lady really took just a deep dive in the history of IQ and everything, as opposed to saying, what's wisdom? I mean, come on, Elon. People are blowing up your cars at your dealerships and so forth. And I thought it could have been a good opportunity to say, how do we just get wiser faster here in the United States?
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. Yes, Claire. Fantastic.
Our family attended a protest yesterday down in Glenwood Springs, and my sign said, "Praying for peace." And I got flipped off quite a few times. I won't tell you the stereotype, but of the person that flipped me off. But I had this immediate visceral sense in my body where I got tingly and hot, and I wanted to yell at them, "I'm praying for you!" To be more aggressive. And I guess this conversation and this topic makes me always kind of return to the image from the Celestine Prophecy, which is a book I read a long time ago, but the image of these energy bodies that meet, and there's always one sort of trying to overtake the other. And I've held that image in my mind often when I'm in conflict or confronted with things that make my blood boil, and just trying to find a way to meet that energy sort of in the middle to create a sense of balance. And I feel like the guys flipping me off have their feelings and their reasons and their validity in this life too. And so I hope that, my sign can meet their middle finger somewhere in the middle. And I guess that's something that I'm holding on to right now, is creating a space for all feelings to have some voice and validity.
Thank you. And just reminds you, we did this webinar recently, and yes, it went above 10,000 people have viewed that webinar about how do we respond. If you haven't seen it, it's on the website. Do have a look at it. But, Heather and I are leaning into what do we do next, and we're going to do something in June. And, the idea that's come up, and, it's a movable feast, so that I may tell you something different next week, but the idea that's come up is to do something about going towards unitive consciousness, towards a unity of consciousness. And I think that's what we're talking about here. It's the idea of creating an understanding that we're all in this together, that there is a unity of consciousness, and that we are separate. We're not separate, but we feel separate. And the flipping off guy and yourself, actually, you're both expressions of that same consciousness, funnily enough. And it's creating the understanding of that we're trying to do, I think, here in the chapel. Thank you. Okay. Anybody else? Great. Thank you. Thank